The third time her SUV tore through my gate, something inside me finally went quiet. It was just after sunrise, that washed-out Texas light that makes everything look peaceful, even when it isn't. I stood at the kitchen sink with a mug of coffee that had already gone cold, staring through the window as dust rolled past the porch like a warning I could no longer ignore. The gate, my gate, hung crooked on one hinge, still swaying from impact. Then came the sound, gravel exploding under tires, an engine accelerating instead of slowing. The white SUV cut straight across the pasture like the land belonged to her, flattening the bluebonnets. My wife had planted with shaking hands during chemotherapy. Flowers disappeared under rubber. Fence posts rattled, cattle scattered in panic. Behind me, Sarah's oxygen machine stuttered as the power flickered from the impact on the line near the porch. That sharp electronic hiccup hit harder than the engine noise ever could. My name is Clayton Rivers. I'm 58 years old. I retired after 28 years in the United States Marines, where my job was keeping hydraulic systems alive on aircraft, carriers, machines where failure meant disaster. These days my world is quieter. 200 acres of pasture in East Texas, a small herd of cattle, and my wife Sarah, who was fighting stage 3 breast cancer with more courage than I thought humanly possible. We bought this ranch 5 years ago, right after her diagnosis. The doctors said stress was the enemy. So we chose space, silence, something living and hopeful. Sarah chose butterflies, monarchs, specifically. She researched migration patterns, native plants, soil conditions. On her good days, she planted slowly. Oxygen tank beside her chair, smiling every time an orange and black wing fluttered through the garden. This land became her refuge. Then came Meadowbrook Heights. 2 miles down the road sat a polished subdivision of matching roofs and matching rules, run by an HOA that believed order was more important than people. At the center of it stood Brenda Winchester, a woman who confused authority with ownership. She claimed she had a right to cross my land. She claimed history was on her side, and every morning she proved those claims by driving faster, louder, and closer to our home. As the dust settled that morning, Sarah stepped onto the porch, pale but smiling weakly as she watched a monarch cling stubbornly to a vine that somehow survived the tires. That was the moment I stopped hoping the problem would go away. Some lines once crossed demand an answer. What Brenda didn't know was that this quiet morning marked the beginning of the worst. The tours started on Tuesdays. 5 vehicles, a dozen people, all of them treating my ranch like a theme park attraction Brenda owned outright. They stepped over fences, left gates open, and talked about potential improvements as if Sarah's garden were an empty lot. I watched from the window as she stood where Sarah once planted milkweed, pointing with a pen and talking about a gazebo. That was the day my prize bull tore his leg trying to escape the noise. $800 in vet bills, weeks of recovery. And that didn't count the damage to the land, or the stress that followed us back into the house. Sarah's doctor noticed it immediately. Blood pressure up, sleep disrupted. Treatment is harder on her body than before. Stress was winning, so I stopped reacting and started documenting. Trail cameras aren't complicated. Motion sensors, heat signatures, timestamps, the same logic used to protect perimeters. Overseas, now quietly watched. My fence line, what they captured surprised even me. Brenda wasn't just touring, she was charging. Neighbors paid cash to walk my land, to take photos, to hear her narrate a story, where she was the protector of progress and I was the obstacle. And when did she notice the cameras? She waved. That's when I understood the danger. Not that she was trespassing, but that she believed her story so completely she no longer feared proof. What I didn't know yet was that those recordings would unravel something far bigger than a simple land dispute. The letter from the county arrived without drama. A notice, a hearing, a claim that an easement existed across my land. My bank froze our credit line within 48 hours. Insurance started asking questions. Neighbors grew distant, unsure which version of the story to believe. Sarah's medical bills didn't slow down just because the paperwork did. That night I couldn't sleep. The sound of the oxygen machine filled the room, like a metronome counting down. Something I couldn't see. So I went to the courthouse. Property disputes aren't won with emotion. They won with records, surveys, dates, signatures. What I found changed the game. There was no easement. Not now, not ever. But there was something else, something Brenda never expected anyone to look for. Her HOA's waterline crossed not just my land, but 3 others, all without permission, all without compensation. 15 years of quiet trespassing. hidden behind authority and paperwork no one questioned. When I showed the survey maps to my neighbors, the room went silent. This wasn't personal anymore. It was systematic. And just as we realized how deep it went, Brenda made her most reckless move yet. Brenda didn't retreat after the hearing. She escalated. Nuisance complaints, threatening letters, claims that our ranch was a danger to property values. An inspector came. He found nothing wrong, but the damage was done. Sarah collapsed during treatment that week. Watching her in that hospital bed, I made a promise I couldn't take back. This would end. Back in the records room, buried under decades of filings, I found the truth. The original water easement had expired in the late 1980s. Expired meant illegal. And the documents Brenda waved around? They were forgeries. Bad ones. Dead signatures. Wrong seals. Dates that couldn't exist. This wasn't entitlement. It was fraud. But the final piece of the puzzle didn't come from a courthouse. It came from the one person closest to her. Her husband showed up after midnight, measured the gate, studied the fence. The next morning he called. I can't be part of this anymore. The folder he slid across the diner table confirmed everything. Real documents, fake ones, a timeline of lies. Brenda hadn't inherited power. She stole it. And now the bluff was collapsing. What we planned next would force her to expose herself, on camera, in public, with no way out. People assume confrontation always looks loud. Shouting, threats, public scenes. They're wrong. The most dangerous confrontations happen quietly, when one side is convinced nothing can stop them, and the other side has already stopped reacting emotionally. That's where I was, after David Winchester handed me the documents and walked out of that diner looking 10 pounds lighter. I didn't feel victory. I felt focus. The same kind I used to feel before a carrier launch, when every bolt, every valve, every pressure reading had to be perfect or people died. Brenda had been lying for years. Now she was cornered, and cornered people don't retreat. They charge. So I stopped thinking like a landowner and started thinking like an engineer again. If Brenda believed she had the right to cross my property, then the next step wasn't arguing. It was forcing a decision point. A moment where she would either stop or expose herself completely. That meant preparation. I hired professionals, licensed, documented, everything done by the book. County permits filed, safety signage installed, notices sent by certified mail, no surprises, no gray areas. The system itself was simple in concept and devastating in execution. Retractable steel bollards, industrial grade, hidden flush with the ground when inactive, invisible to anyone who thought they knew the road. But when triggered, they rose in less than a second with enough force to stop a loaded truck. Not a trap, a boundary. Sensors controlled everything. Weight thresholds, speed detection, manual overrides. Cameras covered every angle. High resolution, night capable, cloud backed. Every inch of that gate was now evidence waiting to happen. While the crew worked, Sarah sat on the porch wrapped in a blanket, watching quietly. Does this mean it's almost over? She asked. It means we stop letting her decide what happens to us, I said. That night, I tested the system myself. Slow approach, nothing. Proper authorization, nothing. But when I simulated the speed Brenda always used, the steel rose with a sound that vibrated through my chest. Final, permanent, unmistakable. I sent Brenda one last letter, polite, direct, unemotional. Private property. Unauthorized access prohibited. Security measures active as of April 10th. She signed for it the next morning. By that afternoon, the neighborhood rumor mill was spinning. I heard words like extremist, intimidation, overreaction. I smiled for the first time in weeks. Because when entitled people feel control slipping, they don't retreat quietly. They make noise. And noise creates evidence. What Brenda planned next wasn't just reckless. It guaranteed she would destroy herself in public. Brenda Winchester didn't confront the barricades directly. She did something far more dangerous. She panicked, and panic always leaks into the public. It started with phone calls. My cell rang nonstop from numbers I didn't recognize. Neighbors from Meadowbrook Heights. Some angry, some confused, a few genuinely scared. Is it true you're blocking our water access? They said our supply might be shut off. Why would you do this to families? By noon, I understood what Brenda was doing. She wasn't fighting me legally. She was turning the community into a weapon. That afternoon, she called an emergency HOA meeting and live-streamed it on Facebook. I watched from my truck parked outside the community center. Phone propped on the dash, volume low. Brenda stood at the front like a crisis commander. She spoke fast, too fast. A rural property owner has taken extreme measures, she told the crowd. He's installed illegal barriers that threaten our community's water security. This is intimidation. This is dangerous. She never said my name. She didn't have to. Charts appeared behind her. Projected numbers. Worst-case scenarios. Claims that water rates would triple if the HOA gave in. She framed herself as the last line of defense between 200 families and disasters. Fear rippled through the room. But fear also makes people ask questions. Someone asked why they'd never heard about easement renewals before. Another asked for documentation. Brenda deflected, talking louder, leaning harder into authority. That's when she made the mistake. She went live again, this time alone in her car. This is what happens when extremists think they can hold communities hostage, she said, eyes sharp, voice trembling with rehearsed outrage. We will not be bullied. The comments didn't go the way she expected. Show the easement. Why wasn't this handled legally? Why are we just hearing about this now? She stopped responding. That night the narrative cracked. Half the neighborhood still believed her. The other half started digging. Old emails surfaced. Meeting minutes. Inconsistencies. The same people who once applauded. Her leadership began whispering doubts. Brenda didn't see it happening. Or worse, she saw it and refused to accept it. Because when people like Brenda lose control of the story, they don't step back. They escalate, and escalation was exactly what she announced. The following morning, Brenda revealed a plan so reckless it guaranteed federal attention, and she broadcast it herself. Brenda called it a community demonstration. That's how she sold it online. But what she planned looked nothing like peaceful protest. Sunday afternoon, she went live again, standing in front of the Meadowbrook Heights clubhouse, flanked by board members and a man wearing tactical gear that looked bought, not earned. Tomorrow morning, she announced, we're taking back access to our water infrastructure, together. Behind her, vehicles were already lining up. SUVs, pickup trucks, 15 of them, a convoy. She framed it as unity, as courage, as families standing up to intimidation. She told residents to bring cameras, to document illegal obstruction, to show the world how unreasonable one man could be. What she didn't realize was that she'd just handed prosecutors everything they ever dream of. Intent, coordination, premeditation. I watched the live stream twice, then called Jennifer Martinez, the federal prosecutor, who'd been quietly monitoring everything since David came forward. She didn't hesitate. She's organizing a conspiracy on camera, Jennifer said. If they attempt to breach your property, it's federal. That night, Sarah and I sat on the porch watching the sunset bleed into the pasture. Monarchs drifted through the garden, oblivious to the storm coming. You okay with this? She asked softly. I'm done letting bullies decide how our story ends, I said. At dawn, the convoy assembled. I could see it from the ridge. 15 vehicles idling, headlights cutting through the mist. Brenda stood in front, giving instructions like a general who'd never been in a real fight. She assumed numbers meant power. She assumed noise meant authority. She assumed no one would stop her. Federal vehicles took position quietly on the county road. Cameras were rolling. Warrants prepared but waiting. All she had to do was walk away. Instead, she climbed into her white Lexus, looked directly into her phone camera and said, Let's show him we're not afraid. The convoy started moving, straight toward my gate. What Brenda didn't understand was that momentum doesn't equal control, and physics doesn't care about entitlement. The moment arrived with terrifying calm. Engines idled as the convoy slowed near my gate. Brenda's Lexus rolled forward first, confident, deliberate, streaming live to hundreds of viewers who believed they were witnessing courage. I stood on the porch beside Sarah, laptop open, system armed. Sensors active, cameras recording, pressure steady. Brenda hesitated for half a second. Then she accelerated. That was all it took. The ground responded faster than her arrogance. Steel bollards erupted from the gravel in a violent, mechanical snap, 3 feet of solid metal rising. In less than a second, Lexus never had a chance. The impact was brutal. Metal screamed. The front end crumpled. The impact was brutal. Metal screamed. The front end crumpled. The transmission cracked open like a dropped engine block. Steam exploded from beneath the hood as fluids poured onto the road. Her horn jammed on, blaring continuously, an awful, unbroken sound that echoed across the pasture. The convoy froze. Vehicles behind her slammed to a stop, boxed in by their own formation. No room to turn around. No space to retreat. Brenda was trapped, and her live stream never cut. You could hear her screaming through shattered glass. "This is illegal! You can't do this!" But it was already over. Unmarked federal vehicles rolled forward. Doors opened. Agents stepped out, calm, purposeful, undeniable. Jennifer Martinez approached the driver's side, badge visible. "Brenda Winchester," she said clearly, loud enough for every camera. "You are under arrest." The live stream exploded with comments, shock, confusion, realization. Brenda tried to argue, tried to invoke documents, tried to claim authority. Jennifer didn't raise her voice. "Ma'am, the documents you've relied on are forgeries. You're under arrest for fraud, conspiracy, and obstruction." Behind them, one of Brenda's hired men tried to run. He didn't make it 10 steps into my pasture. Sarah squeezed my hand, laughing through tears as monarchs fluttered over the chaos, flowers untouched. Finally safe. The horn kept blaring. The soundtrack to collapse. Entitlement met reality, and reality won. What happened next would expose not just one criminal, but an entire community's betrayal hiding in plain sight. Brenda Winchester didn't understand what was happening, even as it was happening to her. She sat frozen behind the wheel of her ruined Lexus, horn still screaming, live stream still running, convinced that this was all some misunderstanding that authority would correct in her favor. That belief shattered the moment federal agents surrounded her vehicle. Agent Martinez spoke clearly, calmly, every word cutting through the chaos. She didn't argue. She didn't debate. She read charges: fraud, forgery, conspiracy, obstruction of justice. Each word landed harder than the last. Brenda's face shifted from outrage to confusion, then finally to fear. She tried to interrupt, to explain, to assert her position as HOA president like it was a badge of immunity. "I have documentation," she insisted. "I've been protecting this community for years." Agent Martinez didn't raise her voice. She simply nodded toward the cameras. "Yes, ma'am. And all of it has been documented." That's when the crowd began to change. Residents who had followed the convoy now stood silent. Phones raised, but expressions were uncertain. Some whispered to each other. Others stared at the destroyed vehicle, trying to reconcile the woman they trusted with the charges they were hearing. One by one, the story they'd been fed started to collapse. Brenda was ordered out of the car. She hesitated, long enough to make the moment unbearable. Then she opened the door. Brenda Winchester didn't understand what was happening, even as it was happening to her. She sat frozen behind the wheel of her ruined Lexus, horn still screaming, live stream still running, convinced that this was all some misunderstanding that authority would correct in her favor. That belief shattered the moment federal agents surrounded her vehicle. Agent Martinez spoke clearly, calmly, every word cutting through the chaos. She didn't argue. She didn't debate. She read charges: fraud, forgery, conspiracy, obstruction of justice. Each word landed harder than the last. Brenda's face shifted from outrage to confusion, then finally to fear. She tried to interrupt, to explain, to assert her position as HOA president like it was a badge of immunity. "I have documentation," she insisted. "I've been protecting this community for years." Agent Martinez didn't raise her voice. She simply nodded toward the cameras. "Yes, ma'am. And all of it has been documented." That's when the crowd began to change. Residents who had followed the convoy now stood silent. Phones raised, but expressions were uncertain. Some whispered to each other. Others stared at the destroyed vehicle, trying to reconcile the woman they trusted with the charges they were hearing. One by one, the story they'd been fed started to collapse. Brenda was ordered out of the car. She hesitated, long enough to make the moment unbearable. Then she opened the door and stepped onto the gravel, like someone walking off a cliff they never believed existed. Handcuffs clicked. The live stream caught everything. Her voice cracked as she demanded to speak to someone in charge. Agent Martinez leaned in slightly. "You are," she said, "of 15 years of fraud." Behind them, another arrest unfolded. The so-called security consultant, hired muscle, not licensed, not clean, was tackled near Sarah's butterfly garden after trying to flee across the pasture. Watching that happen, surrounded by blooming flowers and federal badges, felt surreal. Like justice had finally decided to show up uninvited. As Brenda was led toward the federal vehicle, she locked eyes with me. There was no anger left, no confidence, only disbelief. She had built her life on the assumption that no one would ever push back hard enough to matter. She was wrong, but the arrest was only the beginning, because once the cameras rolled, The truth spread faster than anyone could stop it. By noon, my ranch looked like a crime scene and a media circus. News vans lined the county road. Reporters stood knee-deep in gravel, pointing microphones at anything that would talk. Drones buzzed overhead, capturing aerial shots of steel bollards, flashing lights, and Brenda Winchester's shattered Lexus being loaded onto a flatbed. The story moved fast, faster than Brenda ever could. The livestream clips spread across social media before the tow truck even finished securing the wreck. Side-by-side screenshots appeared everywhere, just a confirmation that the system Brenda believed she controlled had finally turned on her. Restitution was ordered. Prison time assigned. Assets seized. HOA authority dissolved. As the gavel fell, I felt something loosen in my chest that I hadn't realized I'd been carrying. This wasn't a triumph. It was released. Outside the courthouse, reporters asked how it felt to win.
I told them the truth.
This was never about winning, I said. It was about stopping someone who believed rules didn't apply to them. That night, Sarah and I sat on the porch again, watching monarchs drift through the garden like nothing had ever tried to destroy it. She squeezed my hand. "It's finally quiet," she said. And for the first time in a long time, she was right. But the consequences of Brenda's actions would reshape far more than one courtroom, and the fallout was just beginning. The real damage Brenda left behind wasn't measured in bent steel or legal fees. It was trust. In the weeks following her arrest, Meadowbrook Heights felt like a town waking up from a long-shared delusion. People reread emails they'd once ignored. HOA meeting notes suddenly sounded threatening instead of firm. Decisions that once felt inevitable now looked manipulated. The board dissolved within 14 days. County officials stepped in, appointing temporary administrators while audits began. Infrastructure maps were reviewed line by line. Financial records were subpoenaed. What they uncovered was worse than anyone expected. For years, residents had been paying inflated water fees to cover legal risks that should never have existed. Funds meant for maintenance had been diverted into legal reserves that only served to protect Brenda's forgeries if they were ever questioned. Class action lawsuits followed quickly. And this time, the residents weren't defending her. They were demanding accountability. Legitimate easement negotiations began with every affected landowner. Not threats, not pressure. Actual contracts, fair compensation, transparency. When the county finalized the new agreements, my ranch received annual compensation for the water line that crossed our land. Money that should have been paid decades ago. The same happened for my neighbors. Tom Henderson told me it felt like someone had finally acknowledged he existed. Maria Santos cried when she signed her agreement. "My grandfather would have waited his whole life for this," she said. Even more surprising was what happened next. Residents from Meadowbrook Heights started showing up, not to argue, but to apologize. Some admitted they'd felt uneasy for years but were afraid of fines, letters, retaliation. Others said they'd trusted Brenda because she spoke with such certainty. Certainly, it turned out, had been the most dangerous lie of all. Sarah's doctors noticed the change before we did. Her blood pressure stabilized. Her sleep improved. The tension that had followed her through every treatment finally loosened its grip. The ranch felt different too. Quieter, lighter, like land that had been holding its breath and finally exhaled. But as repairs continued and lawsuits settled, I realized something important. This wasn't just a correction. It was as a warning, because while one HOA had fallen, the system that enabled her was still very much alive. Healing doesn't arrive all at once. It comes in small, almost unnoticeable shifts. For Sarah, it started with mornings on the porch again. No flinching at engines, no dust clouds rolling past the windows, just sunlight, birds, and the soft mechanical hum of her oxygen machine keeping time with the breeze. Her butterfly garden became larger than ever. What began as a coping project during chemotherapy expanded into acres of native wildflowers, milkweed, zinnias, cosmos, plants, chosen not for appearance, but for purpose. Researchers from the state university reached out after seeing news footage of monarchs swarming the property during migration season. Within months, a small observation program was established on the ranch. Sarah loved that part the most. Something good came out of all that mess, she said one evening as we watched students take notes near the creek. They'll outlive us. The settlement funds helped cover medical bills that had stacked up during the stress. Veterans groups, quietly at first, step in with donations. After hearing how the fight unfolded, People who'd never met us wrote letters saying the story gave them courage to stand up to their own local bullies. I didn't expect that. I never planned to become a symbol of anything. But word spread fast. Property attorneys started calling. Landowners from other counties asked questions about easements, documentation, and intimidation tactics. Patterns emerged that felt disturbingly familiar. Different names, same playbook. I realized then that Brenda wasn't unique. She was just the one who went too far. Sarah's oncologist confirmed what we already felt. Reduced stress had improved her treatment response. Her cancer entered remission months later. We celebrated quietly. No speeches, no announcements. Just sitting on the porch holding hands, watching monarchs drift across land that finally felt safe again. But peace has a strange way of revealing responsibility. Because once you know how the game is played, walking away isn't always an option. 3 months after everything settled, another letter arrived. Different county, different HOA, same tone. It claimed mineral access rights beneath our land, attached to documents that looked official, enough to scare most people into compliance. I laughed. Then I checked the records. They were fake. Again, that's when the final lesson clicked. Brenda Winchester wasn't an anomaly. She was a symptom. A system that relies on intimidation, instead of transparency, creates people who believe rules exist only for others. HOAs with unchecked authority, officials who assume compliance, landowners who feel isolated and overwhelmed. That combination is fertile ground for abuse. So we did something about it. Using leftover settlement funds, we established a small legal defense program focused on rural property owners and veterans facing HOA overreach. My old Marine buddy Jake took point, applying the same precision we once used overseas to property law cases. Education became the first line of defense. We taught people how to read easement documents, how to request public records, how to spot forged signatures and impossible dates, how to respond without fear. Because documentation beats intimidation every time, Sarah insisted the butterfly garden remain the center of it all. Let people see what's worth protecting, she said. The ranch became a place of learning instead of conflict. Suburban families visited during open days. Kids asked questions about cattle, land, and migration routes. The divide between them and us slowly softened. Brenda wrote once from prison. An apology, carefully worded, regret mixed with self-preservation. Sarah read it quietly, then set it aside. Forgiveness doesn't erase consequences, she said, but it does free us. The steel bollards are still there. They've never needed to rise again. Sometimes I sit on the porch at dawn, watching monarchs lift off from flowers that survive tires, threats, and lies. I think about how close we came to losing this place, not because we were wrong, but because we were quiet. That's the real danger. Silence. If this story taught me anything, it's this. You don't protect your rights by hoping someone else will respect them. You protect them by knowing them and standing firm when tested. And judging by the letters still arriving, it seems some people are determined to keep testing that lesson. Far